Alright, let's go. Yeah. You know, I'm really not a big fan of using super epic choir orchestra-style scores for Spider-Man, you know, all self-aggrandizing. I'm a bigger fan of like a more urban, youthful, kind of cheeky vibe for Spider-Man. Oh, damn. Is this the style we're doing? Holy shit. Yeah, we're down on our luck. We have a shitty apartment, but we're Spider-Man. This is sick, man. Cheeky-ass rock music playing over Spider-Man. This is it. This is Spider-Man. This is the amazing Spider-Man. Oh, no, don't. Come on, don't stop the music. Don't pretend that's going to be the mood of your game and then yank it away from me like that. Come on. The opening of Spider-Man PS4 was pretty cool for me. 8 years after Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man, he's about to finally take down the crime lord Wilson Fisk, implying they've been arch rivals for years and that this opening stage is the climax of that rivalry, establishing how far this Spider-Man has come already in the first set piece of the game. As someone who grew up watching episodes of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon where Spider-Man and Fisk were always at each other's throat, this was cathartic for me. It was a little something nice for me, you know, like including multiple save files and the option to turn subtitles on and off at the main menu before starting the game, unlike in Ratchet & Clank. You know, and you talking for 5 minutes about a title screen would be worth the effort. I've once again saved the industry, single-handedly, just me. Anyway, Insomniac deserve a gold star for this opening, but do they deserve more? Let's dig in. Marvel's Spider-Man for the Sony PlayStation 4 has some pretty weird combat. Spider-Man has a bunch of moves that you can pull off back-to-back to toy with enemies and create fun little combos. It has this cool mechanic by which engaging in combat raises a meter that can be spent either on health or one-hit kill finishing moves, and this is a really good, on-the-fly, risk-reward system. I like it. Good job. I'm gonna shuriken another gold star at you, Insomniac. The area where all this is held back is the fact that Spider-Man doesn't seem to be using traditional hitboxes for enemies when it comes to fighting. You don't hit punch, and then if something touches your fist it gets hurt. It's more a case of you press the attack button, and then that will trigger a strict punching animation between Spider-Man and the enemy. Yeah, let me explain. You see, in something like Devil May Cry or God Hand or whatever, when you hit attack, you're essentially creating a window in which your weapon or your fist will deal damage to anything damageable it comes into contact with. I know that sounds obvious, but stick with me. That means if you're aiming at one enemy, but the hitbox of your attack and the hitbox of any other enemy also collide at any point during your move, that will also count as a hit. That's why in Devil May Cry, you can maybe hit more than one enemy with the same strike, or do a launch move, and maybe catch more than one foe in the upthrust. But in Spider-Man, your launch is going to trigger a strict pre-made animation where Spider-Man launches that one, and only one, enemy. Attacks in the game that aren't specifically some wide area of effect clearer only seem to be able to hit one guy at a time. The experimentation options you have and the different ways you could potentially interact with enemies in a given space is cut down tremendously because of this. Knocking one enemy into another is fun, but you can't launch two blokes into the air at once for some juggling. You can't use basic attacks creatively to hook in more enemies while performing a basic move. You can't launch into one foe and maybe do a little hurt to some others on the way over. Why can't Spider-Man do a little chip damage to another enemy while grappling over to another one? If any of this is doable, I never managed it. The game compounds these restrictions by using an AutoLock on, which as in any action title, can be a bit finicky and puts you at the game's mercy when it comes to which enemy Spider-Man will dart over to next. Sometimes even when I'm given a prompt to hit one enemy, the game still hesitates and would rather hit a closer one. You get a faint outline indicating what enemy Spider-Man will hit, which you can kinda influence by altering his view a bit, but it's a real inexact science. The game has the final say basically, unless you just say screw it and manually aim at the next bozo, which works and is nice to have, but isn't the best, a bit cumbersome. You'd think a simple quick switch button with a nice sturdy lock would be preferable here. The auto-lock on we have thinks it knows best though. The whole system just does a lot of work for you and cuts you off from being creative sometimes yourself as a result. If you're even remotely close to an enemy and you hit attack, Spider-Man rarely swings and misses, rather he transitions into this double kick animation and does the damage anyway. If you kick completely out of range and an enemy comes into range while you're doing it, Spider-Man will Symphony of the Night kind of glide over to him. There's only so many ways things can play out when the rules are so strict. There are less chances to create interesting dynamic fight scenes. Add to that a 30 frames per second lock, which when it comes to timing dodges at the last moment for bonuses feels like it's not quite up to snuff, And you have a combat system with potential to be a super fun, creative Spidey slamfest that's held back by some stilted design. Okay, hold on, let's just let these two finish duking it out. I mean, I guess it is kind of tiring. Web swinging ain't gonna win any prizes for creative play and challenge either. You can basically point Spider-Man at a waypoint, hold R2, and he'll definitely make it over there. The only reason to watch out for buildings is in case you want to get there just a little bit more efficiently and a little bit faster. But it doesn't require much thought either way. Why can Spider-Man run vertically up walls faster than he can run on the ground? So after these complaints, you might think I find this game a bit underwhelming, but unlike a title that picks one type of play to make its focus, and has it turn out maybe a bit mediocre, Spider-Man PS4 is definitely more than the sum of its parts. I mean, you have this incredible looking detailed recreation of Manhattan to explore at your whim, and that's something this game has over other action titles. Damn! It's hard not to smile navigating such a place, no matter the complexity of the mechanics. A lot has been made in the media of how this game makes you feel like Spider-Man, but a lot of the time it's more like I'm being told I'm Spider-Man. Spider-Man as a character has to balance relationships and work with being a superhero, and Spider-Man here will bring up in the game how he's running late or letting somebody down.
Gotta love Doc's enthusiasm, but sometimes it gets him into trouble. Better get there before he hurts himself.
But there's no onus placed on the player to do anything faster or juggle conflicting objectives. Spidey's running late, but you can arrive whenever you want, really. You never have to experience that real pressure of being Spider-Man. The game could have gotten really crazy, like say the Rhino is tearing through New York and you have to go stop him as quick as possible to not annoy someone you've made a commitment to. That may sound a little frustrating and restricting, but if you want a game where you feel like Spider-Man, giving the player total freedom to do whatever they want whenever isn't really feeling like Spider-Man, is it? It's more like a sandbox where you, the player, have Spider-Man's powers without the actual responsibility of being Spider-Man, which is fun in and of itself in its own way and probably what the audience would prefer to do. Yeah, you know, I'm imagining some mad relationship mechanic stuff where if you arrive on time for dates with Mary Jane, she takes off more clothes in the final cutscene or something. Yeah. And now we're on the same page, aren't we? It seems like in general, being Spider-Man swinging around the city could have afforded the game some more neat random crimes than just the same car chases and jewelry store robberies. I don't know, just throw some D-list supervillains down there randomly to appear for me to ruffle up. Okay, I don't want to be in these Mary Jane stealth levels more than I need to, so let's get this over with. Oh no. They heard me. Overall, the story of this game was something I was a bit worried about. Spider-Man is just like the best superhero. Peter Parker is this young outcast who gains superpowers after going through some tragic shit, much like the villains he faces. But unlike them, he manages to overcome the temptation to use his gift selfishly, and it's that constant inner struggle from his origin, all the way up through the Black Suit arc and beyond, that make his development and transformation into unwavering hero so compelling. Especially since he starts as a teenager when we're all evolving and figuring out what kind of person we're gonna be. With his best intentions thrown in his face a lot of the time and his constant misfortune, it seems like he's always just one more tragedy away from letting his emotions override him and suck him into darkness. Spider-Man is the hero I always root for the most to see succeed and overcome his demons. I'll be honest, after Ratchet 2016 completely fumbled the origin of a quite similar character in hindsight, I wasn't totally stoked for Insomniac to tackle this legendary figure. Thankfully, Spider-Man PS4 sidesteps having to contend with that tricky stuff by setting things well into Spidey's history and having us play as a fully developed Peter Parker, which is good. They get to tell their own nice little story with some implied development somewhere else. Not that there aren't studios I could see doing that young era really well. Here, though, we get a pretty nice, older Spider-Man story, and it had some good moments. I'm not sure I'm on board with all this constant radio chatter. Spidey being in direct contact with the police who can mainline him missions to do. I don't know. In my experience, Spider-Man is usually at his most interesting when alone and forced to make decisions without any help. But I don't want to take away anything from some of the scenes that do really hit home with some good weighty emotions near the end. In a big long game like this, some lines are gonna land, and some aren't, but I was never at any point raising eyebrows like I was, you know, back when, that other game.
Telepathopus.
Mary Jane gets a pretty drastic new interpretation from the comics, which I don't think is going to be to everybody's taste. There's some rockiness here and there, but if the story isn't a gold star, it has enough great moments to earn, maybe a little heart scribbled on a notebook or something. There's a lot of fun to be had here for Spidey fans, piecing together what key events have and haven't happened yet in this Spidey canon through collectibles and side quests is a delight. However, in terms of creating its own identity, I think Spider-Man PS4 is so obsessed with being the definitive quote-unquote video game Spider-Man experience that it doesn't really flesh out its own unique vibe and mood, even if you think it does succeed in being a definitive product. The battle music is mostly very typical movie action score stuff, the visuals are attempting to be as cutting edge and photorealistic as possible, so it can't quite eke out a look of its own. There's no moment where the presentation just screams, yeah, this is an IP being used for something totally cool and memorable of its own. I mean, they almost did for like 30 seconds there at the start, and I don't think this is necessarily a problem now, but in 5 to 10 years when technology takes another leap forward, and another studio decides it wants to be the one to do the quote-unquote definitive Spider-Man game next, with the usual villains, photorealistic visuals, and generic movie score, I wonder if this game will become kinda obsolete. Anyway, as we've discussed, I give Spider-Man for PS4 2 gold stars, a heart and a frowny face out of 10. Bye-bye. Alright then, don't forget to check out my Patreon and consider supporting your friendly neighborhood www.patreon.com/TheGamingBritShow, man. Before you all go, I'd like to give a shout out to Mark Brown from Game Maker's Toolkit. You may have noticed I didn't cover the web swinging in much depth in this video, but Mark has a video coming out all about that. You may not know this, but Mark has helped me out a lot in the last couple years, so I wanted to give him a shout out here. Very unlikely you haven't heard of Game Maker's Toolkit by now, but if you haven't, go check him out. Thanks a lot for watching, and catch you later.